Winning an endorsement from an international star like Madonna or the Red Hot Chili Peppers is something of a dream come true. But today, instead of embracing global stardom, all-girl Russian punk outfit Pussy Riot are facing jail. Their crime? This. Earlier this year, they burst into Moscow's main cathedral. They climbed onto an altar considered sacred by Orthodox Christians, and they sang about their desire for the Virgin Mary to remove Vladimir Putin from power. While things didn't quite go their way, Vladimir Putin is now president of Russia for a third term, while the three young women, Maria Alyokina, Ekaterina Samutsevich and Nadezhda Tolokonnikova, have spent most of this week behind a glass wall in court. They could serve up to 7 years for their alleged crimes. Well, here's what President Putin had to say.
I don't think that they should be judged so harshly for this. I hope they will learn something from this themselves. Nevertheless, it's up to the court to make the final decision.
Well, critics of the Kremlin say this is just another example of free speech being repressed in Putin's Russia. My guest tonight, Inga Wortelot, is head of RFI's Russia service. Good to have you with us, Inga.
Hello.
On my left, Nina Berezna is a Russian activist. She's a member of the group Russie Liberté, or Russia's Freedoms. She took part in anti-Putin protests in Moscow earlier this year, and they were the biggest anti-government protests in some 20 years, I understand.
Well, yeah, obviously.
Pretty big protest. All right, we'll get to that later in the programme. We're also joined in the studio by George Frederick Dewsbury. He's an historian and he's an associate researcher at CERSEC. That's the Research Centre for Russia and Central Europe. Good to see you again, George. And tonight in Moscow, Dmitri Babbage is a political analyst and a journalist at Voice of Russia. Dmitri Babbage, I'll begin with you in Moscow. Are these girls going to go to jail for singing a song?
Yes.
And is that right?
Well, I think that basically in Russian society, the trial of Pussy Riot is perceived from different perspectives. It badly split the society. So the damage that these three girls have done is indeed great because we have now two parts of society pitted against each other. But the majority thinks that there should not be complete impunity. Even though the majority thinks that they should not be probably put in jail, there should be some kind of a verdict that would say that what they did was a crime.
How would you respond to that, Nina Berezna? I completely disagree. I don't think it was a crime. I think it was they're a punk band. So that's what they do. They do art, and they do political art, and I think that's how punk bands were formed in the first place. So people trying to show the world what they think and what's going on in Russia, and I think what's going on in Russia, people should know about it. People all over the world. So that's what they were trying to do. They should go to jail for that,
even if they offended people who hold that altar sacred.
But they made sure that none of those people were in the church, in the cathedral. So they made sure they chose the time carefully, and the people the members of staff that work there, well, a lot of things offend me, but I don't go to court.
Okay, all right. Well, that's what two Russians think. Let's find out what a few more think. I think we've got a graphic we can bring up of general public opinion on this trial so far. Can we take a look at that? No? Yes, we can. There we go. Right. Now, in March, just after it happened, 46% of Russians approved a jail term of between 3 and 7 years, something that has been considered quite harsh here in the West. A little later, in July, 43% said that the jail term was disproportionate. George Frederick Dewsbury, do you think public approval is waning on this for any particular reason?
Oh, I think people took a step back and said, what is this at the end of the day? What they did was they did a dance, 80 seconds, I think. And then they went back to their studio and they dubbed the song and the rest of it. And, of course, what we have deeper here is this alliance between the Patriarch Kirill and Putin, and which is surprising because the first time I saw Putin in church back in 2001, he didn't seem he knew how to cross himself. But he has this relationship with this patriarch who has a $30,000 Breguet watch that he wears, and The problem is only 15 to 20% of the Russian Orthodox population is actually active. Perhaps there are others who get baptized and then they get buried. But why is Putin so close to the patriarch? And for me, that's the real question in all this.
All right. Inga Waterflot, has this somewhat backfired for Putin? I mean, they went after this trial because perhaps as a favour to the church, as you said, they're quite close to the church. But what might have slipped under the radar has now become, an international core celeb for people like Madonna, who scrawled Pussy Riot on her back at a recent concert. This is the kind of thing that's got the world talking now, hasn't it?
That usually happens, and it shows that all the thousands, maybe millions of dollars that Russia pays to show its good image on TV, on Russia Today, or in the press who accept to publish, flattery articles, they are spent in vain. And 1 minute action, which costed $300, is much more effective to vehiculate the image of Russia who suffers, who has a problem. And afterwards, we should probably not to go to justice, but to have a debate why it happened, what was behind it. Russia needs this kind of a debate today. After the end of Soviet Union in 1991, still we don't know if church is the official religion or if it's a free country with religion which is far away from the state. So it's all questions which should be debated.
All right. Dmitri Babbage in Moscow. Is Putin too close to the church?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Is Vladimir Putin too close to the church?
Of course, we enjoyed the fact that he was the first president of Russia who actually knew how to behave in church. He knows how to approach the patriarch and the other priests. He knows how to cross himself. So that was pleasant for a lot of Russians because we had 70 years of enforced atheism. And of course, the knowledge of people about religion is still very incomplete. But I would like to say that what happened is actually a sign of total degradation of Western society and its media, because basically what we have been hearing in the last few weeks about Pussy Riots was not full truth. They said it was a political action. Well, these girls called the patriarch a bitch, a female dog, and they also called him God's excrement. If that is not an insult, then what is it?
But this is a punk band, isn't it? I mean, if you compare them to the Sex Pistols, they said some rather uncharitable things about the Queen of England, but they didn't find themselves in court, did they?
Did they call her a bitch?
And they called her many things, not for me to repeat here on air, but they were, that's what punks do, isn't it? They attack the establishment. That's the whole movement.
Well, I think that basically what happened was that they wanted to attract attention. They deliberately filmed it. They have been doing similar things before in smaller churches. So when society finally reacted, and the girls were only arrested when they put the video on the internet, they were not arrested immediately after the action. Then, the society was put before a choice. Either we do something, or with complete impunity, it will go beyond any limits.
George, you're shaking your head over there.
The society. This is an interesting concept. I think what we see here is the state protecting the church, and maybe the church protecting the state. This is what was called Caesaropapism about 1,000 years ago. And so the state is not attacking these girls on the fact that they did something political. They're doing the offense to God and the rest, which makes no sense at all for a secular society. So I don't know what society that our colleague is talking about. Is this the urban society? Is this the rural society? Is this only Orthodox believers? Remember, there are 10 to 15% Muslims in Russia, too. I mean, what is the society that Mr. Babbage is talking about?
Well, I would like to respond to that.
Yes, please.
First, the Muslims, especially the Muslim clergy, actually condemned what the Pussy Riots did. And in that sense, they were completely in solidarity with the Orthodox Church. I also would like to add that the Orthodox Church never called for a jail sentence for the girls. The Western press is lying when it reports that the Orthodox Church, called for a sentence. Separate believers did call for it, but not the church as an institution. the church said it would not get involved in the trial and it would wait for the verdict. And that's exactly what Mr. Putin also said. Actually, the liberal intelligentsia who published their open letter to the Patriarch, they wanted the Patriarch to influence the trial. They wanted the Patriarch, whom these girls called a bitch, they wanted him to say that the girls were good, that they were innocent, and that they should be released. The Patriarch didn't do that. As for the comparison to the British 60s, I would like to say that we Russians have different comparisons. We lived in a country, in the Soviet Union, where things like this punk prayer were in fact encouraged by the state during the 30s, during the 40s, in Stalin's years. So when it happened, a lot of old Orthodox believers had shudders because that was exactly what the young people did under Lenin and Stalin. They were allowed with impunity during the Easter to enter the church and to mock the religion.
Inga.
Mr. Babbage spoke about damage, about society. I must say I'm Russian and I am part of the society. And I must say that I'm Russian living in France. And there are Russian Orthodox who live in France who don't recognize the authority of Moscow Patriarchate. Exactly because it happened after the revolution, 1917, when Russians fled to France and other countries, and they didn't recognize the official church created under Stalin in Moscow. So maybe the church and the patriarch, the girls criticized and treated all those names. It was that church who needs to be debated, what we do today. Why there are still Russians in France who won't recognize Patriarch Kirill and would say that it's a devilish power who is imprisoned the Russian church. So I think what is appropriate of the punk art is to ask questions. Girls pose good question. It was a good question what they did. It was just a question. And for us, for society, to find the answer, not for justice.
All right.
Yes, I would like to make a few points. First of all, why do we have to blindly follow what the church says? It's only an institute, and it's our choice whether we choose to do it or not. Second of all, I think the only thing that Putin really achieved by being friends with the church is persuading religious people in Russia to vote for him, which is completely wrong because church is there to
separated.
Yes, church is separated. It's religion. It's got nothing to do with politics.
But is this enshrined in Russia's political institutions? I mean, is this something that's like in France? It's a secular state. It's very much enshrined that the state and the church have to be separate. That's not necessarily the case in Russia, is it?
It's in the constitution.
It's in the constitution. They have nothing to do with each other. And I think the fact that Putin decided to get involved with religion is only because he's trying to get more people to vote for him. And then
even when there's so few, as George says, so few Russians who consider themselves Orthodox Christians in Russia?
Believers, yeah. A lot of people go to church just for the sake of going to the church, I think. Yeah. Because they think it's cool. They like hanging out in the church. I don't know.
Smells and bells.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And then the third point I wanted to make is that what the girls did in the church, they meant to provoke the questions. So why are we not free to say whatever we like to say? And I think the recent months are actually showing that we're completely not free because there's 3 new laws that have been introduced in the last months, and that's the law about censorship. That's the law about the foreign agents, and it's also the law about the protests, which we're not allowed to do anymore.
And these have all been pushed through Parliament in the 4 months since Vladimir Putin came to power.
Yes, and they have been rushed as well. I think they're preparing those laws for September when people are coming back from the holidays, because there's going to be a big demonstration September 15th. And this is not a free country.
All right, Dmitri Babbage, would you like to respond to what you've just heard?
Well, I can only say that I would object to the first speaker, the Russian living in France, that it was a church created under Stalin. The church that we have in Russia under Moscow Patriarchate was created many centuries ago. Under Stalin, what happened was that Stalin negotiated with the church and allowed the church to have a patriarch in 1943. But under Stalin, the church was continuously repressed. At least 140,000 clergymen had to suffer some kind of repression. Many of them were executed, but they retained their faith, and a lot of them passed that faith to the new generation. So to blame the whole church for the fact that there were some people who just succumbed to Stalin's pressure, I think it's unfair. Also, it's unfair to make generalizations about why people in Russia go to church. There are all kinds of believers in Russia, just like in France. But in general, I would say that there is no danger of Russia becoming a theocratic state. Any person who lived in Russia for some time knows that we are very much like all European countries except Poland. Religion does not play a huge role in Russian society.
All right.
And besides, for
Dmitri?
70 years, religion was repressed.
Dimitri, let him pick you up on that point.
Yes, just one thing that if actually Russians are like all Europeans, or like other people in the world, but unfortunately, because of the damage which was made by the revolution to the Russian society, there was a schism. And there are, Mr. Babbage, I really must tell you that there are lots of Russians in France who think that the real patriarchate of Russian Orthodox Church is not in Moscow. It's really so. So when you're speaking about the church, which church? There are lots of Russians who never accepted the Sovietization of the church. And when you speak about the morality, what Christian morality we are talking about? 30 years ago in Soviet Union, it was illegal to have a cross. Now you have to have a cross. Well, it's better to have it. So when things change so quickly, when they are not defined, maybe it's better to debate, not to go in prison, not to put people in prison.
All right, and very quickly, George, just before we go to break.
Talking of generalizations, Mr. Babbage talked about the degradation of the West, and I'd like to know what he meant by that.
Dmitri Babbage, what did you mean by the degradation of the West?
Well, I meant the fact that about 100% of the Western media and 100% of the Western artists are saying the same things, repeating sometimes the same inaccurate information, and there is no real discussion in the West. In Russia, there is a discussion. There are many points of view on Pussy Riot. Everyone expresses himself or herself freely, and you can see it in the newspapers on the internet. From the West, we hear one voice, and that voice, that situation, to my mind, it reminds me of the Soviet Union. It's degrading.
Well, we're hearing your voice here on French television, France 24, so I'm not sure how true that is. But anyway, we're going to have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll have the second part of the France 24 debate for you right here.